Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the HazMat podcast, episode number 10. So today we're going to be talking about asbestos textured ceiling removal. A lot of the time when I go to look at a job, I get the question, how do you remove the ceiling? What's involved? And there are two specific ways that we deal with asbestos textured ceiling on chipboard. So what I mean is if it's a concrete ceiling, it's always going to be scraped off. But when we're talking about a normal jib type ceiling with a textured plaster on top that happens to be asbestos, we have two methods. So number one, we have the scrape method, and number two, we have the drop method, or what we like to call cut and drop. And we're going to discuss both of them in detail and look at the benefits and then some of the cons with each one. So stick around and we'll first look at the scrape ceiling. Okay, we're talking about ceiling scrape, and it is what it says it is on the box. We get up on a scaffold or the appropriate height equipment if needed, and we actually physically scrape all the material off the jib board. There's nothing really fancy. We may use an agent to soften the plaster up, or we may just scrape it off as it is, maybe with some water suppression. But scraping is a great way to remove the bulk of the material, the asbestos material, off the jib board and actually leave your ceiling reasonably intact. It can be quite a labor-intensive job. You may have seen in marketing material for scraping pictures of people just holding a scraper up against the ceiling and it comes off just like butter. Well, I can tell you that's not always the case, and no two textured ceilings are exactly the same. Sometimes it is like that, but in other cases we have to work dang hard with very sharp scrapers and put a lot of elbow grease into actually getting the material off. And unfortunately, a lot of the time you don't know until you begin the job. So you may have a very dense plastered ceiling, or it may be more powdery and more easy to remove. One of the benefits of a scrape job is you only have to re-plaster and then redecorate the ceiling, and you're back to a nice new safe ceiling. That's obviously going to cut down on a lot of remedial type of work as opposed to pulling the whole thing down. One of the issues, though, that we may have is things like architraves around the ceiling in the room. There may potentially be material hidden behind the architraves or in some of the joints, the actual plastered joints in the ceiling sheets themselves. So you're not always guaranteed an 100% removal. It's always going to be, as far as practical, but it's very hard to say that you've got every single asbestos fibre out by scraping. So that, as opposed to a full pull down when it's 100% guaranteed, that's one big difference there. The second thing is depending on how difficult it is to scrape, you may leave the ceiling in really bad shape. And if it's tough work and really stuck on, like I mentioned, your ceiling may need a lot of remediation just to get it ready for painting. It might not be just a quick skim coat. So yeah, scraping is a cheaper option. And what I mean by that is, compared to a full drop of a ceiling, well, you're saving the cost of actually putting up all brand new ceilings in that room that you're working on. So there's definitely a saving there. So it really depends. You can get either done, obviously, but the quicker overall and cheaper method would be to do a ceiling scrape. Now, next we're going to have a look at the cut or drop method, cut and drop method. Welcome back, and now we're looking at the cut and drop method of textured ceiling removal. So as I probably alluded to earlier, this involves actually pulling the entire ceiling down and essentially treating the whole thing as asbestos waste product. Now, a couple of the pros about that is, one, you're going to end up with nice new ceilings and most likely new insulation as well, because if there is any that comes down when we pull down the old ceiling, that all has to go as asbestos waste as well. The other thing is, it's a good time then to redesign your lighting pattern. You might have one light in the room and you might want 4. Well, when you put a new ceiling up, that's the ideal time to do it. Also, things like scotia or architrave gets replaced as well, so you might want to change the style. These are all great benefits of a full drop. The other one is you are guaranteed to have no asbestos remaining because there's nowhere it can hide. Everything goes in that removal. Some of the cons about a drop would be the cost. Of course, compared to a scrape, it is more expensive because now you're going to need a builder to actually come in afterwards, put up the new ceilings. You will likely need new insulation material, new bats, and again, as I just mentioned, new lighting. So it might be fixtures and wiring. So overall of the project, plus actually it'll still have to be plastered and painted anyway. So in terms of the full project, it's always going to cost a lot more than a ceiling scrape. But a drop method is perfect if your ceilings are already tired, or they may be water damaged, or they may be drooping in areas due to age, or as I mentioned previously, water damage or some kind of earthquake damage as well. Another benefit for the cut and drop method is, at least on the removal side, it can be significantly faster to do than a scrape. And the reason is because obviously you're pulling everything down, so the ceiling material, however dense it may be, is coming down with the jib ceiling anyway, and it doesn't have to be a labor-intensive exercise of scraping it off. So there's some considerations there for the full cut and drop method. Well, there you have it. We've looked at the ceiling scrape method and we've looked at the drop method or cut and drop method. Some of the good points and some of the bad points about both of them. Thank you for tuning in for episode number 10. I'm Chris from the HazMat podcast. I look forward to seeing you again next week with another episode. Please support the channel, subscribe, like, and share a comment if you'd be so kind. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.